Hey everyone, my name is Balint and I'm an indie dev working on a live service game called Tales of Tirunia. This is my second video where I'm going to address your comments on my previous video. Thank you so much for the support. I mean, it was an overwhelming success in my opinion. I feel like a lot of you appreciated sort of the level-headed take and the open forum for discussions around the topic. Again, it's a very passion-driven topic and I'm really happy that we could get away without having to ban too many people from the channel. To be fair, I only banned one person who couldn't behave and I had to remove like 5 comments. And I think the rest of them were just very respectful, very conversation driven. It was awesome to see. So yeah, if you don't know me, right, again, I'm a live service game developer. You may have seen my sunset policy float around Twitter because it was shared by the official Stop Killing Games account as well. But you have to know my bias is towards winning this initiative and pushing it through. So everything I'm doing is to hopefully get to that point, right? That's why I'm opening up these discussions. And that's why I made this video previously. It was aimed towards smaller developers who might be afraid of the implications of the initiative. And I wanted to walk them through sort of what that really means in practice for them. So that's it. Let's get into it. So the first thing that I will address here is so the comments that I'm going to address, again, I'm not going to go through all of them. Obviously, there were over 400 comments under the video. There were a good few that sort of revolved around the same things. So I kind of cherry-picked those, moved them into one segment, picked one that might be representative, and then I'm just addressing those comments, right? So the first one was around sort of when I said, oh, it's not that easy necessarily to convert Linux binary to Windows one. Let's see it here. For example, giving a server binary is not as simple as you might think. Most games run on a Linux server when it comes to like a server client model. Building that for Windows, which is the majority of players' operating system, is not straightforward at all. So it's okay. So why did I say this, right? The main reason is because I was coming from the angle here that the aim of this initiative is to allow pretty much anyone, any player who purchased the game to be able to play that even without any external help necessary. So in my head, when I was saying this, I was like, okay, so that means that maybe every single player should be able to, in an embedded way or an integrated way, run a server whenever they want to. And so let other players join to that server, for example, right? So that's why I said that, because the only way to really achieve that is if you have the server binary as like a Windows build binary, and it's sort of integrated in some shape or form into the flow of the game itself, right? Either through the main menu or maybe through Steam or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Now, a lot of you just said sort of, well, you don't need to create a Windows binary. You can just use a virtualization or a containerization technique like Docker or VMs. And yes, that's true. But again, that's limiting sort of the surface area of who can run the service. That assumes that there is a technical know-how in a certain amount or a certain set of the player base that can satisfy the requirements of this initiative, which may be true. By the way, I put out a vote, so you can go through that vote a little bit later. But it may not be true, right? So I want to sort of explore all the areas that we can to understand the implications from a developer perspective, because I want to get developers on board, right? Here's the thing. This is a European citizens initiative. Game developers are also citizens of the European Union, right? So if you want them to sign the initiative, which, can mean hundreds of thousands of people, you have to actually convince them. And the only way to convince them is going through sort of their fears and uncertainty and doubt and dispel them. So that's what I'm trying to do with this video. And that's why I like to talk about these things, because they surface issues that you may not have thought about. And it might also address those issues so that you don't really fear them anymore. So that's the preamble for that. And then, yeah, right here, you had this, right? But even in that case, the server would need to be converted to Windows, would not need to be converted, sorry. Releasing a Linux version would be enough already, together with a patch to the client to be able to specify the server IP. Okay, again, we talked about this. This only works if you're okay with only a certain subset of players being able to run the servers, which might be true, which may not be true, because it's not clear, right? Like that's the whole thing. So yeah, we addressed that. And then the other thing is, which I didn't mention in the video, but I probably should have, is some of these simply cannot be done very straightforwardly. In modern software development practices, you will hear about this. We use something called a microservices-based architecture. Some of these microservices you write yourself, in which case it's easier to run them. Some of them might be integrated by some third party. It could be a cloud provider, it could be some other service. And that may or may not have a way to be simulated. Some of them can be, but others cannot. And so saying stuff like just use X and just use Y, I think it just hosts way too many assumptions, and it just means that you did not really explore the whole landscape holistically, and you're coming to it from just like a very simplistic mindset. So we cannot really ignore this. And this is why I wanted to say, okay, so that's an option, right? If you have a very simple server architecture, you can just host or give the players the binaries. If you don't, well, then maybe you want to open source your code so you can let people figure it out. Again, open sourcing your code, of course, also assumes that players will have a technical know-how on how to deal with that. But at least it's sort of easier because you don't need to reverse engineer necessarily anything. The code is there, so it's even more accessible to a wider range of your player base. Because reverse engineering binaries is actually not super trivial, whereas looking at a code, understanding it is a lot more trivial, right? So that's my take on it. But again, the whole point I wanted to sort of mention here is it's not just there's a single way to do this. There are multiple ways that you can maybe satisfy this requirement. So we can explore all of those. Hopefully that will help you shed some light on what it means, and maybe we can dispel that uncertainty and doubt about this whole initiative. Okay, so one other comment around this topic was, okay, we had this technology in the 90s. Why is it such a big deal? There are two things. In the 90s, most games were peer-to-peer, which meant someone in the player base hosted the server, others joined that server. But this left things open to malice and attacks, right? In these cases, the whole game logic is included in the same code base, in the same binary or binaries that you install with the installer when you install the game, which means it's easier to sort of reverse engineer exploits and understand where you can do cheats. And so that's what was one of the things that we had was peer-to-peer games were riddled with bots and cheaters, right? Due to this specifically. But the other thing that it opens up to is host abuse. So if the host doesn't like you for whatever reason, they can kick you out very easily. So it doesn't really make sense for any game that is sort of competitive in the sense that you want to compete against other people around the world. It's good for games which you just want to play with friends, and that's fine. But it's not good for another huge part of the player base who actually want to compete globally against other people and beat them. Like it's a different type of issue. Now, the thing is with the current landscape is that if you need to host hundreds of thousands of concurrent players, you need to have a more complex server architecture because otherwise you just won't be able to scale it correctly. And that's why we have all of these, right? Now, again, if this regulation passes, similar to GDPR, companies will have time to actually catch up to the new standards and design the architectures in such a way that it might satisfy both of these things or all of these things, right? That's the hope, at least. And there will be a lot of time. Typically, it's like 1 to 2 years for companies to actually act on a legislation like this. So I think, and also it typically isn't retroactive, or if it is retroactive, you can actually go and try to get like an exception clause so that you are excluded from it. But yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, so I appreciate all the comments here. I think some oversimplifies the issue, and I understand why that is. It's a very, again, complex landscape to keep everything in mind. I'm a full-time senior software architect, so this is my job. I have to look into these things, and I have to explore them and understand the complexities behind them. And I'm hoping that by sharing all of that, we can come to sort of a more transparent and joint more transparent plane and join forces on how we can actually tackle this the best way. Now, I did put out a vote the other day, so if you haven't voted yet, please do. We only have 77 votes on this yet, which is essentially, where do you think the boundary is for Stop Killing Games in terms of what the developers should do when it comes to their end-of-life policy? Or in other words, what would be the minimum result that you're satisfied with, right? And you can see currently with 53%, so it's the majority, we have the first one, which is allow the community to build private server emulators legally, which resonates with the first comment here, which is you don't need to actually provide a Windows binary. Just provide a way for people to deal with something, right? Like let them run their stuff. Then we have provide a server binary with protocol description for one OS. Then the next one is open source code base and full documentation. And then we have something else, write it down in the comment. I'm not going to go through these now. You can feel free to. But what I aim to do with this vote here is, I guess, twofold. So one, if the initiative passes, there's still a chance that the EU Commission is going to ask for clarification on certain things, because whether you like it or not, the current leaving the game in a reasonable functional state, or whatever it is exactly, is vague. So they might ask for clarification. And if they do, then I think we need to be able to provide them, hey, this is actually what the people want, right? This is what the majority of these voters want, and that will help streamline the process later on. Two, if the actual initiative fails this time, for whatever reason, I know it's getting a lot of steam at the moment, which is pretty good. Where are we with it? Yeah, I mean, that's beautiful. That's beautiful, actually. But if it fails for whatever reason, we will be able to try again and maybe streamline it even further. And we will go into some of this stuff later on in this video. But please vote if you haven't already. It would actually be very helpful for the future of this initiative, in my opinion. I'll try to get in touch with Ross. If we get like 1,000 votes or whatever, that would be awesome, because then I can just show him, hey, look, I asked the people, this is what they want. So that's for the first one, the binary stuff. I hope that cleared some of this stuff up. Again, the way I look at it is there should be multiple ways, but we need to find what is the actual thing that we want. If we find that boundary, we can work within that from like a developer perspective. That will also dispel some of the uncertainty around this for developers, and it can also make consumers happy. So it's a win-win situation. The second one was about empty worlds and preservation of the games, right? So I had a take here, which was this. With MMOs and games with open economies, is a little bit harder because you are not getting the full experience, and it might not make that much of a sense to keep those games around. But if you really want to play with 5 of your friends, I guess you could, but I don't see a reason why people would really want to do that. But that's just my opinion. Maybe you have a different opinion. Leave a comment down below if you do. Yeah, so again, it was a personal opinion. I wasn't against having an exception clause in the initiative or whatever for this genre. I personally didn't see the reason, but there were some very nice people who actually elaborated on this, which I think was really cool. Especially for like the speedrunning communities, and also the most recent counterexample to people might not wanting that is the hardcore WoW and Iron Man challenge, right? Essentially, single player experience with hundreds of hours of content for a single character just to get 1 to 60. And that's actually pretty freaking cool. I think that's, I didn't even consider this. So thanks, Zach, for, opening my eyes to this awesome thing. I'm 100% on the same page as you are. Then, okay, let's address the vagueness. I think this is one of the largest ones. Well, here's the thing. We have come a long way since the era of the internet, and we have this divide between different groups now. There's always A versus B, and everyone just wants to shout their thoughts instead of having a conversation. Now, to be fair, Ross did reach out to Thor, and he wanted to talk about these things, and Thor declined. So, he's as guilty as he's saying others are in this situation, in my opinion. But what we should have is a conversation between gamers and game devs Game devs should be striving to build games that are enjoyed by the players, and players should understand that building games is not an easy task. It requires a lot of thought, but we can come together and build something together that works fine. That's my opinion. Yeah. So I got a lot of comments around this, specifically all revolving around this one, right? This is an initiative meant to be from the customer side. It's meant to enact the conversation of the lawmakers about a problem we as customers have, which will then bring the developer side before the lawmakers even ink a draft of a potential law. And a lot of you commented something very similar. And I don't disagree with this, but what I'm trying to get to is a large majority of our voting base is actually people who are small-time game devs or game devs working in the industry, people who are actually doing the work, not the executives at large studios, who might be very afraid of like what happens to them if they sign this petition and if it goes into law. Because they are left out of the conversation, they can only assume that in an already layoffs-riddled environment, they might get laid off because it means that, if this law passes, there will be fewer games, ergo there will be fewer or less demand for game devs. And so what I'm trying to get to here is, yes, it's fine perhaps from the perspective of the initiative itself, but why we need to actually involve both sides in this argument is so that we can convince them early on, before any of this happens, that, hey, this is an initiative that we're doing. These are the reasons. What do you think? And once you involve people in a discussion like that, they will be much more likely to actually support it and take or care about it a lot more. And I want to just show in practice what that might have meant. So there were multiple initiatives. Sorry about the white stuff. I'm going to try and they are all white. Sorry. So there was rights to water, there was save the bees, and there was end the cage. All of these revolved sort of around consumer protection and stuff like that. And they were European citizens initiatives, right? What was interesting about them, especially the Save the Bees one, which actually was accepted, but then received mixed results later down the legislation path, was that it involved farmers as well, right? It had a committee set up, and all of these had committees set up, of course, that's a requirement, but they were representing multiple NGOs. All of these had hundreds of NGOs that they represented, and then some of them, for example, Save the Bees, actually represented the opposition of the draft of the initiative. Why? Because by talking about this, discussing it before the initiative is put forward, you can address comments and issues that might arise during the thing that might block people from voting, which is exactly what happened here, right? Because the developer side was not addressed at all early on, we had one person who was very influential come out and say, hey, this is garbage, or whatever he said. I can't remember the exact words, and it won't work. And that just sort of put a stop to things. I believe if we involved both sides earlier on, maybe through a process, something like forming the committee with all the representatives, holding public forum discussions, putting out an RFC with a 2-month deadline to review, refine the RFC based on the comments, put it out again for a 1-month period, refine again, and then push that as sort of part of the initiative, I think we could have avoided all of this drama, right? So with 3 months of upfront work, we probably could have avoided the 10 months lull that we had, or 9 months lull from the launch of the project all the way to, a few days ago when Ross came out with the new video. And again, I'm very happy that the initiative is doing well right now, and I really hope that it succeeds. But if it doesn't, we should look at this as a learning experience, come up with ways on how we can avoid a similar situation in the future, and go from there. This is not an ideological battle. This is an us versus the current laws, This is us trying to get to a point where we are respected as consumers, right? That's it. It's not an us versus them battle. So there we go. It's all of us against some cause, or with some cause, I guess, in this case. I hope that clarifies my stance. I wasn't saying that the initiative necessarily has to include all of that wording or whatever. What I'm saying is there is something that we can do here with a pre-process of the whole thing, which I think could have yielded better results. Why do I think that? Again, I'm a senior software architect. I've been doing this for years, where I have to push ideas through people who disagree with me very harshly sometimes, okay? That's just the reality of things. This is how politics works. If you involve people into a cause, if you involve people behind a leader, they will follow that cause and follow that leader. But if you sort of try to just surprise them with something, they tend to be very standoffish and try to just not engage at all. So yeah, that's my take on vagueness. And then the last one, which was interesting, and I actually very much agree with this, is this deck. I really don't understand the idea that someone would like a game, kill the company that made the game, and then set up a private server so they can profit from the game. If the game is actually popular, players would be enjoying the experience from the people creating the game and would not like to see a predator destroy the ability of those people to update the game. And yeah, like I didn't call this out in the previous video because I didn't even think about this, but it's actually such a good point. On top of this, one thing that people said a lot was, okay, but sort of if someone does this so that they can monetize the game now, that is just BS, because essentially what would end up happening is anyone could run the game for free because the binaries are out there. So it just makes no sense from a financial point of view to even attempt this, which is actually absolutely freaking true. So thanks for raising that. I think that was really cool to see. Okay, so that's my thoughts. This is going to conclude my Stop Killing Games saga for this time around. I might make another video once, you know, we cross the deadline to see what happens there. I'm really hoping that the initiative passes. If it doesn't, we can regroup at that time. And yeah, if you have any thoughts, let me know. I hope you enjoyed this. It was a bit of a raw brain dump. Sorry if I was rambling here and there. The last thing I want to say is essentially this. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for all the respectful conversations. And thank you everyone who showed interest in my game as well. If you want to support me, you can try the game during the July 12th, 13 playtesting session. It's public, free to play, no responsibilities at all. Join the Discord server, or maybe consider supporting me on Patreon. I have 3 Patreon supporters at the moment: Roka, Dragon, and Scotty. Thank you so much. I really, really do appreciate that and your support. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.